So basically, so when should we kind of utilize all these specialty bars and all these tools? You want to think about where you are at from a meet. As you get closer to the competition, your training should be more and more specific. So whatever the competition bars are that you utilize in competition, so if you compete in something like a USAPL, where they use the same barbell for all three lifts, it's going to be very important that you utilize that competition barbell closer to a competition so you have more specific training, you have a specific adaptation to impose demands. So that said principle is really important. So you want to practice how you play, utilize the competition equipment or as close to the competition equipment as possible. So if you're a USAPL lifter or you train, if you compete with a federation that uses a more stiff bar or the same barbell for all three lifts, important that you train on it. If you compete in federations, for example, like the RPS, which utilizes some different specialty bars, a special squat bar, a special deadlift bar that has more whip to it, it's important during a peaking phase, and once you're kind of in that like six weeks out or less, even 8 weeks for some people, it's important that you get as close to the competition equipment as possible. Now, if you don't have access to this competition equipment, even if you can maybe go to a powerlifting gym for a couple of sessions just to kind of get used to it, just get a feel for it, maybe take your openers, maybe take your projected second attempts on those competition equipment. Maybe you can go to Powerlifting Watch. They have powerlifting gyms, so it's powerliftingwatch.com. And you can kind of get used to using the competition equipment at least a couple of times before the contest, just so you're not kind of shooting in the dark. Now, if it's your first meet and all you have is a regular power bar, I don't think it's the end of the world. I trained on a regular power bar for a long time, and when I got to the meet, it really didn't throw me off too much when I was a teenager starting out competing in powerlifting, but it is something to consider. Now, when you're far out from a competition, some more variation is going to be important for longevity. So you don't want to, if you're always using a straight bar all the time, just like, let's say if you have like a jogger, for example, think about how many repetitions a jogger has, and even though it's low intensity, since it's so many repetitions with the same movement over and over again, there's a lot of overuse injuries for something like jogging, for example. So if all you do is bench, squat, and deadlift with a straight bar and use the exact same barbell, the exact same stance all the time, you're going to create more wear and tear in the joints over a period of time. So it is important for not only your health, but also performance, because it's going to work different muscle groups and things like that. Emphasizes different weak points and different ranges of motion, for example. So for performance and health, it is important when you're in more of the off season, when you're far out from a meet, you're 8, 10, 12 weeks plus out, utilizing things like special bars or harder variations, different variations. So more variety when you're further out from a contest is going to be really important. So if we had to pick 2 bars, and obviously you don't have to, but we really like to utilize something like a safety squat bar, just because, especially if you have injuries, if maybe you're an athlete, the fact that you could squat without any hands and stuff is a great option. It takes a lot of stress off the shoulders, which is one of the biggest problems, especially if you're like a low bar squatter, kind of having your scapula kind of pinned down with all that weight. So something like a safety squat bar is great for performance and as well health. So you're going to try to train that upper back a little bit more. It's going to train the muscle groups that are going to be important for a big squat. Duffalo bar is great because you can also utilize it for both squatting and benching. So if you prefer to have a little bit less variation and a little bit something closer to the competition lift, Duffalo bar is a great option, especially during the off season. So it's going to be a little bit closer to your competition squat, but since it has that camber, it's going to allow for a little bit more comfortable position on the shoulders. And like I said, for me, this was a big thing. I've always had kind of weak pecs and shoulders. I've had a lot of like shoulder injuries and stuff like wrestling in high school and things like that. And this really helped kind of me personally, and a lot of our lifters kind of build up that bottom end strength for the bench. And I really don't think that there's a lot of kind of things that can kind of mimic this. Now, if you do have some shoulder issues, or let's say you have really long arms, you're really skinny, this may not be something that you're going to be ready for right away. But in my opinion, like I said, we train athletes of all different shapes and sizes. Some people as light as 105 or 114 weight class, upwards of super heavyweight, and we've never really had any issues with the range of motion. But just make sure that you're not, if you're using the duffel bar and you are benching and maybe you have long arms, make sure that you have good scapular position. You're not really kind of rolling forward, the shoulders in the bottom. So that'd be the only cautionary tale I would say with this. But for the average person, the average size lifter, the duffel bar is an excellent tool for bench press because it's going to extend the range of motion a little bit. Especially if you're a proficient bencher and you have a big arch, or maybe you have a really big sternum, and you really don't have like our coach Benny, he's got a very short stroke. So something like a duffalo bar, you could even combine the duffalo bar even with your feet up for a really big stretch in the pecs and a really big range of motion. I don't recommend that necessarily for someone who's super skinny and super long arms, but whether you're doing a feet up benching with this or using a competition arch with this, it's going to extend the range of motion, build up the pecs, build up the shoulder, stabilize it a little bit more. So this is a great variation to help build up your bench. And as far as deadlift, if you do compete in a federation with a deadlift bar, just using a stiff bar is a really great variation, and the stiffer bar you could use. We don't, and if you even want to go a step further and you want to do something like a little bit of a thicker bar, not too much thicker, but just challenge the grip a little bit, make it a little bit harder. So the stiffer the bar, it's going to be a little bit harder off the floor. It's going to increase the range of motion just slightly because it's going to be less whip. So in a deadlift bar, maybe let's say you could pull an inch or two of slack out of it. In a stiff bar, maybe you can't pull any slack out of it, so it's actually going to extend the range of motion a little bit, which can be very, very efficient for building strength and building strength out of the bottom. So when we're talking about sticking points and things like that, something like a Buffalo bar or something like a stiff bar deadlift, if you're doing, let's say, like a close stance with heels, safety squat bar, all these are going to extend the range of motion, increase the time under tension. All these things are going to make the lifts a little bit more challenging. So they're all good forms for underloading of the lifts. It's going to allow for a greater muscular stimulus with less overall load. So these are great exercises to do in the off season when you're maybe in a hypertrophy phase of training, or you're somewhere in the neighborhood of more than 10, 12, or 16 weeks plus out from a contest. Utilize some harder variation, utilize these special bars. The biggest thing here is that variation is going to help keep things fresh mentally, but also physically as well, as you're going to prevent those overuse injuries and also add some variety and spice to your training, keep the lifters mentally stimulated and keep things fresh in your training. So that is the how and the why you want to use special bars in your training. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, please subscribe, and then we'll see you next time.